China takes more of our soybeans than all other foreign customers combined.
China just canceled orders for 2.4 million tons of U.S. soybeans, redirecting that demand to Brazil in a stunning move that erased $1.1 billion in American farm contracts overnight. Cargo ships loaded with U.S. soybeans were ordered to turn around mid-Pacific, leaving farmers and exporters reeling and searching for answers. This wasn't a random decision. It was a calculated strike timed just days after the U.S. slapped $90 billion in tariffs on Chinese goods. Beijing didn't bother with warnings or empty threats. Instead, it targeted the heart of America's agricultural economy right at the peak of export season. Soybeans are only the start. U.S. corn exports to China have already plummeted 49%, and Brazil just secured a $2.6 billion grain deal with China. With over $8 billion invested in Latin America's logistics networks, China now controls 64% of the region's soybean import routes. This is more than a trade dispute. It's a strategic pivot that could threaten the collapse of America's farm economy. In this video, we'll break down the deeper strategy behind China's sudden move, how it caught Washington off guard, sent panic through the Midwest, and triggered shockwaves across global markets. Using real-time trade data and insights from Bloomberg, the USDA, and the Wall Street Journal, we'll explore whether this marks the start of a broader economic divide between the world's two largest economies. Global markets are moving fast, and you don't want to miss what's next. When President Trump imposed $90 billion in tariffs on Chinese goods, China didn't just protest, it struck back swiftly and silently. Instead of public threats, Beijing targeted America's agricultural sector where it knew it could inflict maximum damage. First, China slapped a 34% tariff on all U.S. imports, hitting farmers hard, especially those growing soybeans, corn, and wheat. Crop prices tanked, wiping out hundreds of millions in expected profits. Farmers in states like Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana were left scrambling. Then came the gut punch. A U.S. soybean shipment bound for China was abruptly turned back in the middle of the ocean with no warning or explanation. Days later, China canceled all remaining U.S. soybean orders, 2.4 million metric tons worth $1.1 billion. Major players like Cargill and Archer Daniels Midland, who'd already factored that revenue into their projections, were blindsided. Silos across the Midwest overflowed with unsold soybeans, and prices cratered further. The fallout was brutal. U.S. farmers, already grappling with rising costs for fuel, fertilizer, and equipment, watched soybean prices drop 3.7% on the Chicago Board of Trade, erasing $500 million in market value in a single day. Banks tightened lending, leaving farmers in a financial chokehold. Farmers held off on purchases, delayed equipment upgrades, and slashed hiring. The ripple effect hit hard. Truckers, grain handlers, and fuel suppliers all took a beating. China timed its move perfectly. March through June is crunch time for U.S. soybean exports when contracts are locked in and farmers make most of their income. By pulling out, China caused maximum chaos. To justify it, Chinese officials claimed they found fungus and pesticide issues. But U.S. authorities and the WTO investigated and found nothing. Financial experts called it a smokescreen, a political jab dressed up as a safety concern. The fallout was massive. Global buyers started doubting U.S. reliability. Shipping insurers jacked up rates. International markets added restrictions or turned to other suppliers. Even futures markets shifted. Traders began baking in political risk. Banks started factoring trade war exposure into farm loans. Other export-driven industries like pharmaceuticals and rare earths began wondering, are we next? This wasn't just a trade spat. It was economic warfare. By targeting time-sensitive exports, China dealt serious damage without firing a shot. And the threat's far from over. If China can abruptly stop buying soybeans, it can just as easily cut off lithium, rare earths, or medical supplies. Behind those canceled shipments is a cold, calculated strategy. Disrupt, destabilize, and dominate silently. For years, the U.S. assumed its dominance in agricultural exports to China was untouchable. Not anymore. China's been quietly building a trade network that sidesteps the U.S. entirely. The key player? Brazil. From 2020 to 2024, Brazil's soybean exports to China surged by 48%. Meanwhile, China poured over 280 billion Brazilian RA into Brazil's infrastructure. Grain corridors, rail lines, and port terminals were built to ship goods straight to China. This wasn't just about boosting Brazil's farms. It was a deliberate move to rewire the global supply chain in China's favor. By 2024, 64% of China's soybean imports flowed through Chinese-financed logistics. Brazil now supplies nearly 70% of China's soybean demand, free from U.S. tariffs or political pressure. This isn't diversification, it's a geopolitical escape hatch. China's not just buying soybeans, it's securing a food supply it controls, untethered from U.S. influence. And the story doesn't end there. In the first quarter of 2025, U.S. corn exports to China tanked in both price and volume. China's response? A new supply deal with Brazil, wiping out $2.6 billion in U.S. trade. At the same time, China dumped 1.2 million tons of U.S. corn from its reserves, blaming price instability. This isn't just diversification, it's decoupling. In April 2025, HSBC's Commodity Outlook revealed China had secured grain deals with Argentina, Russia, Pakistan, and Brazil, covering over 70% of its grain and oilseed needs. Wall Street's sounding the alarm. China's moves signal a seismic shift in global commodity markets. The U.S. still holds major influence in global markets, but China's move to distance itself from American agriculture reveals just how fast the balance of power can shift. Soybeans and corn might sound like ordinary crops, but they are the backbone of the U.S. economy. These crops generate billions of dollars, feed millions, and keep entire Midwest communities alive. Let's break it down. In 2024, U.S. farmers produced over 4.2 billion bushels of soybeans and 15.3 billion bushels of corn. The U.S. leads the world in corn production and ranks among the top 2 soybean exporters. Together, these crops bring in over $50 billion annually from exports alone. Add in domestic sales and processing, and their value tops $100 billion a year. That's a massive chunk of the economy. But it's not just about dollars. It's about people. Growing soybeans and corn employs thousands directly and supports 1.5 million jobs in industries like transportation, equipment, fertilizers, and food production. In rural areas, these crops are often the only thing keeping small towns afloat. A drop in demand can lead to lost jobs, shuttered businesses, and local governments strapped for cash. The Midwest feels this the most. States like Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, Indiana, and South Dakota. In Illinois alone, soybeans cover nearly 10 million acres. These states rely on corn and soybeans to survive. They also happen to be strong supporters of Donald Trump in past elections. But China's retaliation targeting American soybean and corn farmers has created a political storm for Trump. His support in farm-heavy states like Iowa is slipping fast, and in swing states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, losing rural votes could cost him dearly in the midterms. Farmers are furious and feel betrayed. Many say they trusted Trump to protect their way of life, not jeopardize it with trade wars. I was expecting the lower cost of a lot of just your everyday living things and hoping that he would make things better for everybody in America because that's what we need. This isn't just a farming crisis. It's a threat to America's economy and global influence. If soybean and corn production collapses, food prices will spike. Ethanol shortages could drive up gas prices and thousands of jobs could disappear. Worse, America risks losing its position as a leading global supplier of food and animal feed. That's a devastating hit to our economy and our standing on the world stage. But what's really alarming Washington is China's growing influence right in America's backyard. For decades, the U.S. assumed it had a lock on its neighbors, Latin America and Canada, expecting them to stay politically and economically aligned with Washington. That's no longer the reality. China has quietly expanded its presence using trade deals, massive investments, and infrastructure projects to pull these countries closer to Beijing and away from the U.S. Let's start with Latin America, where China has poured over $137 billion since 2005. This isn't just charity, it's strategic. China is building dams, ports, power plants, roads, and even 5G networks. These projects aren't only about development, they're about securing long-term control. In Brazil, China is now the top trading partner, buying over $100 billion in goods annually, mostly soybeans, iron ore, and oil. In return, Chinese companies are taking over parts of Brazil's power grid. For example, China invested $51 billion in Brazilian infrastructure, including a massive 2,500-kilometer power line. China's national oil company, CNPC, is also drilling in Brazil's oil fields. In 2022, it joined China's Belt and Road Initiative, a global trade and infrastructure network. China pledged $23 billion in investments, including an $8 billion nuclear power plant, Atucha 3. Experts warn this gives China dangerous, Chinese companies are also building ports along Argentina's coast, securing access to critical shipping routes. It's not just about money. Countries like Brazil and Argentina are aligning with China through groups like BRICS+, which includes Russia and others pushing to ditch the US dollar in global trade. Ports along Argentina's coast securing access to critical shipping routes. It's not just about money. Countries like Brazil and Argentina are aligning with China through groups like BRICS+, which includes Russia and others pushing to ditch the US dollar in global trade. They're increasingly using currencies like the Chinese yuan instead, signaling a shift toward a multipolar world where the US doesn't call the shots. Now here's the kicker. Even Canada, America's closest ally, is drifting toward China. While Canada remains part of the Western alliance, its economy leans heavily on Chinese trade, especially in agriculture. In 2024, Canada exported $30 billion in goods to China, with farming leading the way. Canada is now China's second largest supplier of canola, third largest for pork, and a major source of barley, 41% of exports, and peas, 31%. If China stopped buying, Canadian farmers would be in deep trouble. America's backyard isn't just slipping away, it's being rebuilt with Beijing's money. So, what will the Trump administration do about China's growing grip? Because this isn't just about soybean exports. It's about America's hold on the future of global trade. This story is far from over. We'll keep tracking every move, every shift, and every shock wave. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter.